Hello, everybody. My name is Liam Smith, and I'm a consultant at the Audience Agency. I'm a white man in my 30s with red hair and glasses, and my pronouns are he and him. And I am also joined by my colleague, Carly.
Hello everyone, I'm Carly, I'm a consultant specialising in participation at the Audience Agency. I'm a white woman in my mid-30s, I have brown wavy hair, I'm wearing a grey jumper and my pronouns are she, her.
So for those who require it, we do have closed captions available. You can see the option in the bottom row on Zoom for auto transcript. If there is anything else, however, that we can do to ensure an enjoyable experience for everybody today, please send us a message in the chat. So we have quite a lot to get through today, beginning with this intro. Then we'll be making the case for putting communities at the heart of audience development plans. We'll look at some people-centered approaches, some tools and examples of good practice. And just to let you all know, this is going to be an interactive event, and we'll be drawing on insights from the room throughout this afternoon. So for those who don't know, Carly and I work for the Audience Agency, and we are a charity that does, well, we do quite a lot of things really. But our main goal is to broaden and deepen engagement in arts and culture. Now, when Carly and I were planning this event, we were keen to have a guest speaker come and talk about audience development in practice. However, we realized that there are some very talented and interesting people in the room with us already today. So what we're going to do is draw on our collective insights over the course of this event. We'll be using Mentimeter to do this, and we have a warm-up activity for you to get started with. What we'd like to know is, what do you hope to get out of today? There is a link in... Carly can share in the chat. There's also the QR code here if you would like to scan it with your phone. I'll just stop sharing in a moment and go to the Mentimeter website. Have you added the link to the chat, Carly? No worries. I've just added it, don't worry. So there is a link in the chat. I'm just going to stop sharing now and go to the Mentimeter page. Great. So I can see people are adding their responses already. We've got, I wanted to be immersed in new ways of engaging communities around us, innovative ideas to engage our audience on a course and refer to it, to gain insights into best practices, developing a new audience development strategy and thinking differently about outreach in our town, learning more methods of hyperlocal marketing, making people aware of who we are, where we are, and what we do within our notoriously low engaged borough. We have a diverse community and need to use data to engage them, try to understand more ways to engage our community, learn how to diversify our audience in a creative way, new ways to engage communities with low engaged audiences, a lot of priority areas here, it's good to see. So I'm interested in exploring strategies to engaging our audiences to support program development, to learn how I can start to program with my community involved, to help us build a new audience development plan using best practice. These are all great, all along the same lines as well. Building strategies for co-programming and co-producing. We'll definitely hear more about that later. To do better as a community-focused organization, we want to improve two-way communications. It's really good to hear the sort of iterative nature that a lot of you are arriving from. Learning on creating sustainable engagement with communities is another. This is great. We'll do more on Mentimeter later on. I just wanted to get you warmed up with that activity, and thank you very much for sharing. I'll just go back to the PowerPoint presentation now. So I think what we've seen from those responses, there are lots of very good reasons for writing an audience development plan. But depending on your situation, you may need to contextualize this from time to time to get various stakeholders on board. We thought we'd begin by making a case in favor of putting communities at the heart of your audience development plan. And I think there's no better way to start than a very significant reason to do this, that it is enshrined within the Human Rights Declaration. Article 27, paragraph 1 states that every person has the right to take part in the cultural life of their community. And not many people are aware that there have been and continue to be international tribunals held where these rights have been breached. There's an example here of Billy et al. Versus Australia, and this is a case that's been brought by a group of Indigenous Australians who claim that their government's poor response to climate change is affecting their right to a cultural life. It's a really fascinating legal case that is well worth reading up on. This next quote I like to drop into presentations from time to time as a reminder that this is a long journey that we're all on and we all have a role to play. This is from Britain's first ever policy for the arts, written by MP Jenny Lee back in 1965. And it says, today, a searching reappraisal of the situation in relation to the cultural standards and opportunities is in progress. More and more people begin to appreciate that the exclusion of so many for so long from the best of our cultural heritage can become as damaging to the privileged minority as to the underprivileged majority. We walk the same streets, breathe the same air, are exposed to the same sights and sounds. I'd urge everybody to read this paper if you haven't already. It's certainly one of my favorite white papers and a well-written one at that. I think you'll find there is a lot in there that is still relevant today. So you can see that there is historic precedence for what we're about to talk to you about today. And bring it up right up to the modern day, and a final quote that you're all probably over familiar with by now. Big shout out to all of those who've been sweating over their Arts Council applications this month. This is probably the last thing you want to see right now, but in the current Let's Create strategy, it says by 2030, we want England to be a country in which the creativity of each of us is valued and given the chance to flourish, and where every one of us has access to a remarkable range of high quality cultural experiences. And of course, Arts Council England have also released information on their priority areas going forward as well. I think in spite of all of this, it's also important to note that tackling poverty of opportunity in the arts isn't just about a mission of social justice. Our organisations, our sector is richer as a result of putting communities at the heart of audience development. Taking a people-centred or co-created approach means a reciprocal relationship that benefits both parties. I've chosen to use a short example from Creative People and Places to illustrate this. So my hometown is Sandwell, and it is second on the list of least likely to take part in publicly funded arts and culture. This is according to the Active Lives survey, which decides which areas can be selected as a Creative People and Places project. This data is important as we all pay for publicly funded arts and culture, and lottery tickets are often purchased in areas where people are least likely to benefit from this funding. However, it's also a little misleading as it makes people think that these areas are culturally deprived. Sandwell is in fact a culturally rich place with a history of innovation. I used to work as a producer at the local Creative People and Places in this area, and by putting people at the heart of our audience development plan, we were able to make the most of the local area. Desi Pubs is a project that showcases intangible cultural heritage that's unique to Sandwell. These pubs are unique cultural venues where East meets West, and you can experience performances, exhibitions and stories. The Desi Pub signs, one of which you can see here, were developed under the stewardship of landlords and punters at these pubs, but were then exhibited at the Venice Biennale this year. So now this project could have only come about through co-creation and putting people at the heart of our audience development plan, and it demonstrates that it's not just about improving life chances in an area, but also that our sector is richer because of it. So I'm going to pass over to Carly now, who will talk to you about using principles of community engagement in your practice.
We wanted to touch on some of these principles, as this work shouldn't be seen as an afterthought or an add-on, but something that's very much embedded within your practice. So the first point here is around empathy. It starts with building authentic relationships, which is a long game, because it's about nurturing those relationships, but also maintaining connections that are beneficial to community members and partners, as well as yourselves as organisations, and through that building trust and an understanding of what's happening on the ground. And one really simple way that you can do that is to show up for other people. Often as artists and institutions, we're looking for people to come to us, whereas there's a raft of activities happening in communities already that's been developed on their terms. So it's about getting out and attending grassroots events, whether that's community fairs, other people's AGMs and coffee mornings, and just showing up and being useful to other people. And through that you'll meet networks of people doing really interesting things in interesting ways. And another thing to consider is speaking to people about what you can offer that's useful. So whether that's space, if you are a venue-based organisation, it could be support around safeguarding if you're looking to work with, say, smaller organisations doing interesting things within specific communities who maybe don't have those policies and practices in place. So that's a really good place to start. The next point, with not to. So rather than starting from the perspective that you have something to offer that other people are going to be interested in, this is about creating a dialogue and creating opportunities to co-create with people that are relevant to what they're interested in. There are some fantastic, we touch on co-creation, but there are some fantastic resources. So take a look at the Co-Creating Change Network resources, as Liam mentioned, the Creative People and Places resources, Fun Palaces and Heart of Glass. They're just a few, but super valuable. This next point, co-prototype, is a great principle. So testing things in the real world, asking for feedback, and really using that knowledge to shape your practice going forward. Co-evaluate. When you've delivered a programme, this is around learning from that together, creating a legacy and really valuing people's knowledge that they brought to the table. So this might be around co-authoring a report and making sure that you're reflecting back your learning to the people that you've worked with. So these are just a few principles that we'll touch on in more detail in a moment. Liam, can we go to the next slide, please? There's a brilliant article by Isabel Singer called Museums as Predators. You'll be able to find this online, that in essence explores how often arts organisations consult with a group of people but don't necessarily listen or take on board any real sense of understanding in terms of what they're saying, and almost cherry pick what that organisation needs. And Singer quotes a museum practitioner who spoke at a conference who says, people confuse consultation and collaboration. It's a different power relationship. When you're looking to involve communities, you need to think about the invitation that you're making and actually what you're asking people to contribute to and how authentic that ask is. So this is a spectrum. On the screen now, there's a spectrum which I'll describe. The audience agency have a very similar one actually, but it asks the question, where does the power lie? And now all these processes are valuable and have the place, but it's acknowledging what practice you're using and why, and being transparent about that. So on this scale, on the left, we have least empowered, and on the right, most empowered. And it starts on the left with informed. So these individuals are told about the decisions or actions after they are finalised. So an example of this might be a newsletter that you send out detailing your plans and your upcoming seasons or work, which is super, super valuable, but you're not necessarily asking for feedback, or these people aren't contributing in any way. Up the scale slightly more empowered is consulted. So this is people who provide feedback at key milestones, but they're not necessarily involved in the process of creating your work. So this might be a stakeholder or steering group who you bring a programme to for reflection. In the middle of the scale, we have participant, so those that are actively contributing their ideas throughout the process. So this might be participatory work, people working with artists and creating work. Up the scale, we have responsible, so people who know the nitty-gritty details and they're part of, they're responsible, they have agency for the work. So this is co-creation, people who are generating work. And then finally, the most empowered, we have people who make ultimate decisions within an organisation. So a really great example here is the ways in which Contact Theatre in Manchester have a young person, for example, as the chair of the board. So a theatre for young people, led by young people. So to summarise here, it's ensuring that what you're delivering isn't a tick box exercise, but it's a genuine conversation or collaboration. And depending on where you're starting from, you're aiming to move people up this scale, giving them more agency in the development of your plans and inviting people where you can to contribute right at the beginning of that planning process. So now we've looked at these principles, we're going to look at a couple of tools that the audience agency have, which might be of use as a starting point.
Great, thanks, Carly. So there's a couple of tools that we're going to go over with today, and that's the area profile reports and then how they relate to audience spectrum. I'm just going to stop sharing now because what I want to do is show you what it looks like when you visit this website. We will share these links after the today's event. So the link that sends you to area profile reports, this is what you'll be met with. And what we have available are a range of bespoke reports that you can purchase to meet your needs. So these are scalable. And I just want to show you one of the examples. As you'll see, there are several examples that you can download for free to have a test drive of what is available in these resources. The one we're going to look at today is an area profile report plus, and the example area that we have for that is I'm going to stop sharing again, sorry. So this is what an area profile report plus looks like, and the example that we have here today is for Northampton. And what basically an area profile report will do is give you an overview of the population within your target area. So it is a bespoke report, and it is a great first step in terms of showing you the demographics and cultural engagement in your catchment area. The key thing to I must emphasize with this is that an audience profile report, the information within them is made by crunching together population data, and there is no actual booker or attendance data included, as it is all based on the actual population in your defined target area. So i.e. there is nothing from the audience finder data set in here showing real or actual bookers from your organization. The That being said, they're a really good starting point in showing you who and how people engage in culture in your area. And it's compared against national data sets too. So you can find out what makes your community unique. Looking at this report, then we'll go to segmentation. And here, the audience profile within the area of Northampton has been broken down by several segmentation tools. The first of which is Audience Spectrum, which is run by the audience agency. Those who are eagle-eyed among you will be crying out right now that this is an old report, and you are right. Rather excitingly, Audience Spectrum has been enhanced and segment profiles have been updated to match changes seen at a population level. So even if you're a seasoned expert in Audience Spectrum, you may well benefit from exploring all the new updates we have made available for free on our website. This includes tips on where to meet this particular demographic that you're looking at, and how to market opportunities, as well as what not to do as well. But just looking at this report, then you'll see that one of the most overrepresented audience segments is Facebook families, or what was formerly known as Facebook families. But if I go back to the audience agency website, sorry to flick between the two so much. On the audience agency website, there is a whole page on Audience Spectrum, and we have a breakdown of what these segments mean. So if you go right down to the bottom of this page, you will find all of the Audience Spectrum segments available to look at. So Facebook families, as you can now see, has become frontline families. So if this is overrepresented in Northampton, we want to find out more about them. There's plenty of information here in terms of their activity level, their attitudes, the sectors and places they're most likely to frequent, digital activities within this group, and how best to communicate. We've also further segmented these profiles, so you'll see that there is an F1 and F2 break. What we'll see when we go back to the audience profile report, the profile report for Northampton, is that there is a significantly younger demographic in an area like Northampton. So therefore, you'll want to find out more about the F2 subsegment. So I hope that's making some sense right now. I would definitely encourage everybody to have a look at the updated segment profiles on our website, with much more information on the right-hand side: profiles, attitudes, sectors, places, digital activities. Just going to go back to the report again. So there's also information on Mosaic group profiles for the local area within the report, and this is designed by Experian. And it is a profiling tool which combines a wide range of information to create a summary of the likely characteristics of each UK household. But this is primarily with regards to consumer habits. So it is more for those who have a strong commercial arm as well, but still interesting. Here we have arts museum and heritage attendance. So you can see in Northampton, there is always a good summary at the top. So for Northampton, the overall target population has similar levels of cultural engagement to the base population, which is the national population. So arts attendance among the target population in the last 12 months, presenting the highest level of engagement, are theatre at the very top with 39%, followed by popular rock concerts, also at 39%. You can see here as well, cinema visits are comparable with the base population. The bars on the right-hand side are very interesting because they show you where there is an under and over representation across different groups. This is especially apparent, for example, when we go to demographics. I mentioned earlier, the age profile within Northampton is exceptionally low. Age 20 to 24 is a dominant adult age group. And as you can see here, when the bars are pink and moving towards the right-hand side, that represents an overrepresentation, whereas other groups are somewhat underrepresented. You can see that the ages of 18 to 19, 20 to 24, and 25 to 29 are overrepresented in Northampton. This should therefore influence any audience development plan with regards to how you market to that particular age group. And likewise, you can see across ethnic groups, health, families dependent on children, approximate social grades. This is based on, I believe, NRS social grades, which is attuned to class in terms of employment as well. For those who are marketing professionals, you'll be interested at the very bottom here in terms of TGI media, how people access their information. At the very top as well, the summary in terms of newspaper readership. You can read here, the most read daily newspaper among this target population is The Sun. So again, in terms of having those strategic partnerships in the local area, it can also help to identify who those might be. So an audience profile report gives you a lot of information, but it's definitely not all of the information. So what I'm saying is that what you find out in this report needs to be coupled with good quality community engagement. So I want to hand back to Carly now to talk through a bit what this looks like. You're on mute, Carly.
Apologies. Yeah, so we've just looked at data from Northampton there as an example. Before joining the audience agency, I worked at the Oldham Coliseum Theatre, so wanted to draw on data from Oldham, because obviously that tells you so much, but it's about taking the temperature of a play nuances of different areas. So the following data has been extracted from Oldham's area profile reports, and that might be something you do initially to explore opportunities for initiating community engagement. But using the principles we discussed, I'll give some examples of the ways you might approach making invitations to communities, from meeting partners to considering representation, and thinking about what your offer is and how you communicate that offer. Could we go to the next slide, please, Liam? So this first point around building relationships. So from the data, we know that Oldham has a high percentage of people under the age of 20. And in terms of cultural engagement, Oldham has a high proportion of households from the frontline family segment, which tend to be the lowest engaged in terms of accessing cultural venues and activities. So we were looking to engage more people under 20 and families. So what we did was look for partners we could connect with, quite simply, to build relationships, and look where the activity was already happening. So for example, in Oldham, there's a fantastic organisation called the Play Action Group, who work in community centres, and they deliver free, accessible arts activities. And often these activities for children are happening at the same time as an adult session. So quite often this was an ESOL session, so an English speaking session for adults who speak English as a second language, which is an interesting model actually in itself. So you had that parental engagement and then that child and young person engagement. And what was interesting, I suppose, about working with Play Action Group and Oldham libraries as well. Libraries are fantastic for meeting members of the community who often feel very comfortable in these public spaces, is that we were meeting people on their doorsteps. And there was a sense of trust in the partners and these spaces. So it meant that we were able to just open dialogue with people, and again, build relationships and activities with partners that were also beneficial to them and what they had to offer. Could we go to the next slide, please, Liam? So again, on building relationships, we know from the data Oldham has a high percentage of people living in social housing. And social housing providers can be a really valuable partner and resource, and particularly if you're looking to work in a hyper-local way in specific areas. They have direct contact with residents, understand some of the issues that are happening on the ground. They'll often have resident groups and spaces and offices in place that are really well connected. So these are another great area to explore. So consider finding which providers operate in your locale and building relationships and opportunities through this. So things like, you know, creative collaborations could include street art, you know, taking your work directly to places and engaging families that way, consulting with resident groups, partnership work that involves ticket offers, and communicating via their channels, so through their resident newsletters, for example. We've got an example on the screen from Regenda Homes in Oldham. Thanks, Liam. Can we go to the next slide? So this point goes back to the idea about understanding your community and the nuances of different spaces. Consider developing a heat map of where, how, and when people are engaging with specific spaces, and create a dialogue from there. So in Oldham, bubble tea bars and dessert bars are accessed by a lot of young people, particularly near Oldham College. So this is a street leading up to Oldham College called Union Street. And quite often the bubble tea and dessert bars are halal. So it attracted a lot of young people of South Asian heritage and young people who wouldn't necessarily consider coming to, say, a youth theatre session or activities in the theatre building itself. So what we did was essentially set up shop in one of these spaces and just have a dialogue with the young people that came in. And what this is what it says in the title, that meeting people where they are. You know, rather than starting from the perspective where you kind of want and expect people to come to you, look at what spaces are being used in your community already and look for opportunities and ways that you can collaborate and be present within these spaces. Next slide, please, Liam. So this is a really key one around providing opportunities to co-create and build legacy. So Oldham has a high percentage of residents of South Asian heritage. So these communities were a key consideration in the Coliseum's planning. And a particularly significant relationship that we developed in Oldham was with the Women's Chai Project, which is led by a practitioner called Najma Khalid. And we forged a really long-term, mutually beneficial relationship with Najma, who set up a series of women's groups with the aim of trying to tackle social isolation amongst women of South Asian heritage. Because often these women were homemakers and lacked some social opportunities outside of their family circles. So Najma created these women's groups within primary school settings. So it's a brilliant model of practice. So what we did was, in the first instance, offer participatory opportunities where we visited these groups and delivered activities that the women were interested in. And then from there, when we kind of built up that trust and relationship, we began to co-create with the women, who created work both on and off stage, really interesting pieces of work. And they used the Coliseum spaces on their terms. And as a result of that process, and then building up almost a sense of ownership of the theatre building, they kind of continue to engage with us in different and new ways. So whether that be us sending bespoke ticket offers, whether that was them contacting us about opportunities they wanted to take part in, or ideas that they wanted to test and try out, we made real space in our programme to be able to support that. So building legacy opportunities and thinking about the potential journey of where these relationships will go is a really important element of this. It's about really investing in that relationship. But on this point, I think it's really interesting how people plan within their programmes, co-creation projects. And just to acknowledge that it is quite difficult, because quite often you're being responsible and adaptable. So if you're kind of setting out your plans for the year or the 4 years, it can be really difficult within a business plan. But I think the relationships will be key to that, you know, building these relationships where it does feel more organic and where you're leaving space to devolve some of that power in terms of how and when you make work. And also creating a culture within the organisation where you're being very reflective and reflexive in your practice to understand what, you know, what's actually going on here, who are we engaging, and what is this looking like. Next slide, please, Liam. So community champions. Some of the women engaged in the project, the Chai Women's project that I just touched on, became community champions for the Coliseum, who were essentially connectors and advocates. And community champions are well-connected members of the local community. They are representative of the demographics of an area. They receive payment for the time. They keep informed about your offer through social meetups, press nights and events. They might have access to print and other resources. But essentially, these are people who are community leaders in their own right, in their own context. And they can be a fantastic way of you connecting to underserved communities and cold spots, if you will, because they understand the community. They live and breathe these spaces. And through you creating these kind of social opportunities and building a network of community champions, you can start to build further and deeper connections within the community. So that's a really good and solid example of something to consider if you're quite early on in this journey. Could we go to the next slide, please, Liam? So final example here is around sounding boards or steering groups. We've touched on actually throughout this session so far representation in terms of data, who lives in your local area. So really key to this is ensuring that if you're setting up a group like a steering group, that it is representative of different voices and it is diverse and reflective of your local area. An important thing to consider as well is valuing people's time, but also different lived experiences. So these groups can be set up in different ways. At the Coliseum, we had a youth steering group who very much led on our youth engagement work and youth programme, and they did co-create their own projects, their own festivals, and they informed our wider work from a young people's perspective. So 2 members sat on the Coliseum's board, 2 youth representatives. And then we also had a community steering group, which was made up of community leaders. So Najma, who I spoke about before, sat on the community steering group. There was an imam from a mosque, and it was representative of the community groups that existed in Oldham. And they had less of a kind of co-creation role, but more they acted as a sounding board. We tested ideas with them and wanted a dialogue to ensure that what we were doing was relevant and accessible to different people. So there are different kind of ways of setting this up. So consider what's most useful to your organisation. Often a mixed group in terms of ages can be very interesting. So take a look at a citizens' assembly model, where you draw on different members of the community who all bring a different voice and opinion. And it can be a really interesting way to explore how you can change your offer and what you can do to be better reflective of the demographic broadly. So valuing people's time, just to echo what I said in the previous slide, you know, think about budgeting for this work, and it doesn't have to be masses of people, you know, a small select group, but you look after these people and value their time. And the next point, this is very interesting, I think, is around playing back ideas. So if you do set up a sounding board or a steering group, playback is where you don't just take somebody's ideas and interpret them in a certain way, but you actually digest that and then present it back to them for further clarity, reflection, interrogation, and it can just add layers of knowledge to that and understanding. So if you do set up a group like this, it's a really good idea to you know, keep them informed, present back to them the research, and really try and co-author an approach around your work where they feel really involved. Because going back to Isabel Singer's article, what you want to avoid is just kind of cherry picking ideas that you think might be relevant. You know, you're actively listening and then responding to that feedback. Be facilitated in a democratic way. So we've all been to group situations where you have someone very vocal and dominant, which are super valuable, but actually you want to make sure you consider how these events are facilitated to make sure that you're including everybody's voice, and consider creative ways to facilitate these sessions, and consider access needs. So when you're considering consultation in this way, you know, do consider your art form and what you can bring to this in a really creative and exciting format. So those are just a few examples, but we're super aware we've got lots of really interesting people joining us today. So we'd really like to open this conversation out a little bit. Thanks, Liam.
Yeah, no problem. And as Carly touched upon there, you know, there isn't one right way of delivering on this kind of work. It's got to be tailored to meet the needs and challenges of your community. So we are keen to hear from you now. We've got a new Mentimeter board set up for you, and we want to find out what are some of your challenges that you're facing, first of all. So we'll give you a moment to think upon that and respond in turn. While you do that, I'll just go to the Mentimeter slides. So firstly, we've got capacity, nowhere near enough staff. That can be a very common challenge that people come up against. Connecting with people who have had bad experiences, so they are reluctant to engage. It is very fragile trust with them, some of our organizations. Lack of relationships and representation within our organization, that's very honest. We are at the beginning of our journey with 2 community champions. That's wonderful to hear. We will be talking more about how we're solving challenges as well in the next slide. So really good to hear that come through already. lack of data, lack of engagement from those we have reached out to in the past, capacity and time to research. Our artistic leadership has changed in the last year, so we need to reconnect and remake community relationships in the most helpful way. Engaging young people, demographic age range 19 to 35. We are a rural, actually on that point, it would be good to pick up later on, what's driving that commitment to engaging young people. Is it pressures from funders? Is it a recognition of not having had that engagement previously? If you want to let us know to elaborate a bit more, that'd be great. We are a rural touring organisation and cover a wide area with different needs in different places. Resources and direction, not empowered to take it on. Engaging with new communities through participation and outreach projects, but then not able to bring them into the building, i.e. in the theatre. Senior leaders, budget holders don't want to take time to develop the communities. They want instant income. We have a lot of different pressures on us as organisations, and sometimes it can be hard to prioritise community engagement. I can totally see where you're coming from and the frustration that you must feel with that. Wide range of communities across multiple socioeconomic backgrounds, making sure they all feel heard and community work is beneficial to them all. Stigma, in capital letters, participants thinking that theatre arts activity isn't for them, especially in our new projects that have branched into new community settings, for example, schools. Again, we'll be looking at ways to sort of solve these challenges in the next slide. I wonder if anyone has come across that sort of idea of stigma before and can care to elaborate how they've tackled that. Timescales for delivering this work, not aligning with timescales from funders. Yeah, that's a big one. Knowing who to make relationships with. Yeah, it's hard to make that first step, isn't it? I think Carly was mentioning there in terms of community and champions, and recognizing, there's a humility in leadership, maybe that it's not necessarily the organization that need to make that first connection, but there may be someone already within that community who can help to facilitate those relationships. It is easier said than done, though. It's not an easy thing. Lack of relationships. We've only recently opened our new community building and trying to engage with new audiences for the first time. Capacity is a big thing. I also think jadedness with staff can cause lack of motivation and innovation. Yes, burnout is a big thing across our sector at the moment. There's a lot of reports that are highlighting that burnout is increasingly a big issue in a lot of our activity. Getting the rest of the team on board, changing attitudes, embedding this process in everyday practice. Time and resources, again, building relationships in communities we would like to engage as we produce a festival every 2 years in a place. Not having buy-in from the top of the organisation. Sorry, Carly, did you want to feed in there?
No, sorry, I was just musing.
Sorry. These are all really great, and it's fantastic that you've been so generous in sharing these. I hope you don't mind while I just read them out for everyone's benefit. Political leaders make it difficult to have a focused plan. We never stay long enough in a community to meaningfully engage. So we would nurture or establish, but not maintain and follow through as we're a small team moving on to the next project. Yeah, very interesting. The political leaders, just to go back to that one, actually, I haven't seen that one come up that often. Finding the time or space to forge meaningful relationships with new communities when faced with demand from management to be producing lots of activity. Not knowing how to run a group like that and what to ask them. That's quite a good one, actually, and again, quite honest. Do you have anything to feed back on that one immediately, Carly? Not to put you on the spot, but not knowing what to ask community groups and that sort of community representation to start the conversation to begin with.
I think it's starting from it's starting from getting to know people, isn't it, and finding out what they currently do, what would they like to do, and what could your organisation do more of? So rather than going to people with your offer, I think it's definitely about that initial dialogue, getting to know people and finding out what they're interested in and what skills they could bring to the table. And in terms of facilitating a group like that, consider bringing a creative facilitator on board who's able to kind of hold that space if it's something you're not comfortable with. And again, make sure you incentivize it, or just make sure that people are being valued for the time when they're there. But yeah, it is that can be tricky actually, especially if you're asking people to come to your space. But I think they're probably some starting points, or approach an existing group. So it might not be something that you create and put together, but it might be you ask a local housing association, you ask an existing group that operates in the area, can you come and ask them some questions? And in return, it could be that you give them some tickets, or that you run something creative for them. We've got a comment from Ruth. I'll just read out quickly in the chat. So Ruth says, my starting point has been finding out what people currently know about the museum. They all know it, a very high percentage had no idea it offered a programme of activities and events, followed by what do they think of the programme and why. As I'm freelance, it makes it slightly easier for them and for me in terms of hearing constructive feedback. So that's a really good point around, yeah, maybe it is you bring in a freelancer in, or a creative practitioner who can hold that space in a more neutral way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to pick up what Carly was saying there, someone mentioned in the comments earlier, I can't really find it now, but it was about keeping things simple basically. And I think that we do have a tendency in our sector to overthink things. We want things to be creative and fun and engaging, but ultimately it is about meeting people where they feel most comfortable and actually inviting people. I think the word invitation is key with all of this.
Yes, I think that's a really good point actually, Liam, around invitation, because a lot of the comments have been around capacity in a team, timeframes, funding, pressures from management. And I think often if you start from the point where you have an invitation, so it could be an invitation to community groups to respond to a theme that's connected to a show you're producing, or whatever your program is as artists and practitioners. And that way you're opening up an opportunity for them to create work in their context, whether that be pieces of artwork, whether it be a piece of theatre, and you're building this connection with these groups without much resource. That's relying on group leaders kind of being inventive in their group settings and coming up with work. And it might be that if you are venue based, that you present that work at a press night as kind of a bit of a prelude to a show, or touring companies, it could be kind of attached to the programme within each setting. So I think it quite often can start with just a very simple invitation. An example of this is at the Coliseum, we delivered a community partnership scheme, which was really organic and simple. So we took a theme from a main stage show and we asked groups to respond to that. We sent them a box of resources. So 5 groups a year received, say for example, in response to the Pitman Painters, which is about a group of working class miners who took part in painting activities. We took from that theme portraits and sent groups a box with a mirror in, some words and phrases, picture frames, so very simple kind of put together resources, and ask the group to just have a conversation around those items. And quite often there'd be somebody in the room kind of facilitating that, but it was on the group's terms. And from that, some of them created like a piece of theatre or an artwork that we presented alongside the run of that show. So very simple kind of ideas that you can do is a good place to start.
Great. I'll run through the rest of these so we get a sense of everyone else's challenges, and then we've tried to respond to a few of these already, but it'd be great actually if all of you would like to respond to some of these challenges as well in turn. We'll go into the next slide shortly, but let me just run through the rest. So we've got money again, working within a tight time frame, limited resources, and staff to give engagement and outreach the focus it needs. Reaching young people, clear that they are missing from our analysis, and despite efforts to bring events into the program that are aimed at this target group. That's interesting. So there's already been efforts made. So starting a whole program from scratch, targeting new communities from the outset. Yeah, ensuring that we are working with or genuinely complement what cultural activity is already in place. We do not want to duplicate or compete. So we need an accurate understanding of what is already in place and thriving. Yes, that's a really good point, actually. A lot of what we've discussed already sort of appears in silo, but obviously none of us operate in silo. We all part of a huge cultural ecosystem, so it were, and yeah, we need to remain in touch and build partnerships in the local area to understand where our organization fits alongside others, and it's not just within the cultural sector as well. Having great partnerships with third sector bodies in particular can help you to reach groups that wouldn't otherwise engage with cultural activity normally. We had tremendous success working with voluntary sector councils in the Black Country. There's not, one person mentioned in the chat actually in terms of digital engagement, some of you may be dealing with a digital divide, so it can be quite difficult to get the word out about projects, but if you are working with voluntary sector and third sector bodies, they are generally more attuned to how to reach certain groups through alternative means. Freelance and working 5 hours a week to create a steering group for a museum with representatives from C22 villages. As their villages, they don't all have any form of groups to tap into. Facebook community groups have been more active than in person. Second time, actually, someone's mentioned that Facebook has been more appropriate than in-person activity. It'd be very interesting to see how that compares to an area profile report, because generally speaking, the audience spectrum segment, we have got tips and advice online about what sort of social media tools are going to hit certain segments better than others. With 6 different strains of work across the organization, pulling each department together to have a consistent approach. Yes, so leadership has come up a few times now. Local partner groups seeing our activity as a nice one-off rather than an ongoing partnership. Don't want to repeat work of other organizations. Yeah, can local organizations join forces for this work? I definitely argue in favor of that. Before, I'm sure there may be other examples actually within the collective today that we can draw on.
Yeah, I think that's where it's really interesting to draw on different partners from outside the arts. So you're looking at a local place-based approach where you're identifying local issues, concerns, opportunities, and through that building up this network and like Liam said, this kind of local ecology of opportunities. So that would be a really interesting thing to explore, whether your organisation could kind of host a community steering group of some sort that would feed into this.
And that's just reminded me actually, within the third sector, there is something called the ABCD method, and that's asset-based community development. I've just put a link, well, just put the name of that in the chat. Well worth looking into that. It's about mapping local resources and then leveraging that collectively. So you conduct asset-based community development in partnership with people from a variety of different sectors and organizations. Just what Carly was saying there, there's some really useful information online if you Google asset-based community development. Wanting to research and prepare properly to the point that it stops you from taking action. Yeah, I think we've all been there. I certainly have. All museum and offer is quite niche, and it's quite hard to know how we can support the community in a way that's of mutual benefit. Yes, in terms of niche offers, I think, again, strategic partners can help that in terms of maximizing your offer, but that's probably going more down to a marketing route. I wonder if there's any other support that can be offered from others. Sudden demand for co-creation and co-production from Arts Council England without the time or budget to staff and collaborating artists in how to successfully facilitate this new practice. Yeah, managing that change will be tricky. Carly, did you have anything to respond to that one?
I can just totally relate to this point. I think that as well, it is very difficult, as I said before, to plan for these projects. Quite often, if you've got a core programme that's more participatory focused, suddenly this shift can be quite difficult because it is much more organic. But I think if you can create spaces in your programme where you can I suppose a space, if you hold a space, even a physical space, or just space within your like time frame as a practitioner, where you can go, okay, this is an opportunity for a group or a person to make something, and from the relationships you've developed, hopefully you can kind of move into somebody wanting to generate work with you who has kind of more agency in that process. But I can totally relate. It's really difficult, and quite often it relies on short-term funding, because you might have pressures, like you say, within your budget. So I think that is really tricky, but create the space where you can, I'd say, and also, yeah, be quite responsive if you can, and reflective in your practice. But yeah, totally, that's a tricky one.
Definitely. The the pull of fund, all funders expect a certain amount of pivoting, don't they? And that can be difficult in terms of planning strategically. Moving on to the last few, then we've got community engagement isn't seen as creative. SMT often put it in opposition to commissioning popular artists, leading to presenting projects in areas that have no relevance. Yeah, attitudes are slow to change around it. I mean, more and more so you are seeing, I mean, the example that's always put forward is obviously the Turner Prize. Last Turner Prize was well, the only people shortlisted, well, there was no people, it was all collectives. And the idea of working in collectives and with the local community is becoming part of the popular psyche, but it is a slow process, and it is hard to root that out. Ways of working across creative engagement and marketing teams, we've just not nailed it, and work in silo. Limited time to understand and incorporate Indigenous knowledge due to pressure in meeting project objectives. Absolutely. Such thin and nimble staffing that to invest time and new ideas in a structured marketing campaign is difficult. These are all great, and thank you so much for sharing. Like I said, we do have this one last task because we want to end it on a bit more of a positive, and we want to look at what people are doing that has been successful already. So I'm going to now move to the next slide.
There were some such interesting points there, really interesting. It'd be lovely to, over another session, potentially unpick some of this. And Alex in the chat actually said that from the perspective of a receiving house, this can be really difficult, which is a great point, where you have, obviously you're not generating that same kind of artistic program, but receiving work, how do you then put some of this in place? So, you know, if any of you are from a receiving house who have some good examples of this, please let us know. There there was an interesting point there as well around silo between marketing and a learning team, which is really interesting. And I think I've certainly experienced that. And one of the things I think works particularly well is being responsible as learning practitioners as well for collecting data. I think quite often we see that as learning practitioners do see that as an afterthought. So I think it's ways that you can complement each other's work and making sure you're a data-rich organisation that has different opportunities to engage the community in more front-facing and more traditional marketing channels. But fascinating points. It'll be really interesting to hear some of the solutions that have worked for yourselves.
Yeah, so when you go onto the Mentimeter link now, and it is the same link throughout, you can now add a comment about what has worked particularly well for you. We are going into the last 20 minutes of this session, but if you do have any questions as well that you would like answered, do post those in the chat function, and feel free to respond to any of the other participants as well if you have come up with something similar. And but I'll start reading these out. So already said it twice, but Facebook community groups in person is good to make 1 or 2 contacts, but putting a survey and a Canva post in groups has given more fruit. Yeah, and it's very cost effective when it works well. I'm really pleased that it's worked well in that context. Like I say, it is well worth understanding the segment of the group that you're trying to work with, because Facebook will be very effective for certain groups, not so effective in others, but great to hear that it's worked well in that context. Research and time, just having the time to know the landscape and understand the community / like-minded organizations around you can make your strategies so much more well-informed. Absolutely. Allowing time at the start of co-creation projects to get to know the young people and ask the question, what do you want to make work about, and what is important to you as young people today? We take these ideas and build projects around them. That's lovely. Really great point. It's almost that looks like the first steps of a human-centered design approach. So the first steps of human-centered design is building empathy and, asking then the sort of how might we question. So how might we do this? And working iteratively on those questions. Next up, making sure that when we find enthusiastic creatives who want to learn more about our location, that we make extra time and energy available to yes and project development ideas, knowing that we can be a conduit to our local communities. Yeah, that's from improv classes, I remember. Yes, and that's a really good way of responding to groups. Signage and physical print outside around our building has drawn people in. Physically opening doors and signposting how people can come in and what they are welcome to do so. Yeah, absolutely. Those working in buildings, I think it is a case that a lot of these buildings weren't built with your local community in mind in many ways, and it is a challenge to make it more welcoming and to draw people in. So anything you can do around signage and making it a more friendly and attractive option, particularly when you're competing with other offers on your high street, is
Liam,
yes.
Just to add, sorry, before you move on, we've had an interesting comment from Haley, who says, as an organisation with no venue, having time based with a partner in a fixed space over a long time has given us much more opportunity to work collaboratively with the community. So that's really interesting in terms of, meeting people where they are, and taking work outside of your walls. We've also got a comment from Megan, who says, I'd be interested to know what has worked for those who are tasked with getting teams behind audience development and participation work. When you have a plan, how do you get everyone on board with it? So that's really interesting question, if anyone wants to add anything to the board based on that.
Lovely. I'll carry on with some of these examples as we may start to answer those questions as we go through. Building partnerships over many years is paying dividends in terms of local community groups and organizations now have trust in our work and want to be involved. I think that pays testament to the fact that this is not a quick process. It takes time to build relationships that are genuinely fruitful and genuinely reciprocal. So it is a long-term strategy in many cases. Our friends of the museum group are valuable to connecting with the community. That's great to know. Yeah, lovely example there of having that community representation then. Daily Facebook posting minimized to 1 post per day and keeping the formal page clean. Open up a friends of social media platform to encourage communication so that people can comment without the main site being bombarded. Yeah, absolutely. I like, sounds like you're not interested in being that gatekeeper then, and there's a lot of communication that's able to happen organically. Bringing young people, community members onto our board of trustees. If their voices are crucial in our work, we have to embody that in our organizational setup. Working in partnership with other community organizations to help with recruitment, also building a true relationship with participants. They then bring their friends along. Target audience is rural communities within the collecting area, so very broad. Would like to take objects out but freelance, so hard to take collections, but take my own as they're a good talking point. It's the Facebook lady. And involving front-facing teams and drawing on their knowledge of the collection to provide a welcome space for community groups. Yes, it's really crucial that any strategy that you employ is embedded within the entire team. I know that's easier said than done. Obviously, you'll have community engagement teams, some of you, but it is important that every department within your organization is at least aware of a new strategy around your audience development plan. For communities with no existing groups to tap into, I'm trying pubs. Yes, pubs are a favorite of mine. We launched a critical friends group recently, which proved really successful. They met in person in our building. Their feedback is influencing my autumn programming, and I will contact them directly as decisions are made around timings of events. That's fantastic. And it'd be great if some reflection is then built into that as well, so you can build on what worked and then look at where there may be areas to improve as well. So it's a constant iterative process in many ways. Going out to work in schools, community locations, working with partners who are already engaging communities. It's good. Listening and responding rather than making decisions on their behalf. Yes, having a responsive attitude rather than a prescriptive one, I think is really crucial. Yeah, listening to your audience is really key. Connecting deeply with our cultural organizations in our area so that we're all pulling together to do this type of work, but not all rushing to work in the same community ward. Joined up, not competitive. Good old-fashioned paper feedback slips on exit from our events. Immediate, simple, and very useful. We are big fans of evaluation here at the Audience Agency and thoroughly support you in doing that. We are on a journey working with 10 community ambassadors. They have been put at the center of our audience and business plan. They aren't just a vehicle to give away tickets, but have an active voice in our campaigns. That is fantastic. I mean, Carly, where would you say that sort of sits on the scale that you were talking about earlier?
That's so interesting, like you say, about being an active voice. It'd be great to hear more about that. Yeah, like you say, they're not just there as kind of a ticket gateway, but they have got an active role in communicating that offer as well. So that's fascinating.
Next, we got make plans together to get buy-in. This works with teams and communities. Giving options online like Padlet, surveys, Zooms, and in-person get-togethers are always communities can be part of the steering groups. I 100% agree with you on that. Digital tools is something that we've not really picked up on too much during this session, but digital engagement is increasingly crucial with all arts organizations, but it has to be done effectively. Digital engagement is a double-edged sword. You will be able to engage wider audiences, but you will also limit engagement in other areas. So it's good to have a variety of different tools and methods in your community engagement. We tried to more reels on Instagram within the building, and people are loving it. Excellent. Employing change makers in our organization. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'd love to know what that means. That sounds really interesting, though. Programming in public outdoor spaces where audiences have agency and ownership. Yeah, excellent. Always reviewing how we can deepen participants' level of engagement from low, for example, first time through the door, to high, actively taking part in weekly sessions. Same approaches with audiences too. Yeah. Carrying out a stakeholder analysis at the beginning has helped to identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, so as to help locate a more proactive and a more reliable work team. Yeah, so some of you will be familiar with SWOT analysis. That's a really good way of starting your plan from scratch. Someone mentioned already the sort of political environment you're in. So complementing a SWOT analysis with a PESTLE, which is political, environmental, social, technological, you get the gist. Complementing a SWOT analysis with a PESTLE is really good in terms of identifying where there may be opportunities to maximize your approach in your area. And then finally, we've got working on building relationships with other organizations and venues, sitting on a board or steering group for another organization.
Okay, that's really fascinating. And there was a question around, will we be sharing these, which I absolutely think we will. They're really interesting. Sorry, I was just responding to a question there from Francis. We've got a response to Megan's question from Emily, which says presenting. So just to recap, Megan's question was around how do you bring people on board with your plans? And Emily says presenting to the whole team about what audience development is and how it will positively impact on the organisation has been helpful. There are examples such as California Symphony Orchestra and Opera Australia that have turned their work around through audience development. Also, if your organisations are genuinely committed to EDI, pointing out that this can be only achieved through truly understanding audience reach, need, engagement strategies and data. That's really interesting. Yeah, there is something around communicating the importance of this across the organisation. And yeah, you know, starting from who lives in these communities, I think is a really good place to start, and why that's important. I'm just scrolling up to see if there are any interesting things I've missed in the chat. Has anybody got anything they'd like to share with us? Please do let us know if there are any examples you'd like to tell us about. I think a couple of really interesting points have come up. The one around facilitating these conversations and where to start in terms of partnership work and resource are such interesting questions. We're coming kind of to the end of our session now. I'll just read out a comment that Cheryl's put in, but do let Liam and myself know if there's anything in particular you think, any conversations you'd like to pick up, or similar kind of presentations that you'd find really useful. Do let us know, because we kind of want to be responsible to what our colleagues in the sector are experiencing. And we want to open up a dialogue through these conversations, and I feel like a lot's come up, and if it's valuable to kind of do a similar session or focus it in a little bit, please do let us know. Like, be super honest with your feedback. So Cheryl's point is, we have had an ethnic minority community change maker a disabled community change maker, and currently recruiting an LGBTQ plus change maker to make sure that those groups and communities are fully represented and included in our work. We had a questions there about, are these roles paid, and Cheryl said yeah. So if there are any final comments or questions, please do let us know, and just shout out if you've got anything you'd like to ask. Just making sure no one's got their hands up. Okay, well, I have a unique opportunity with my venue being redeveloped with a new team, so keen to get this right for when we reopen. That's an exciting opportunity, Rebecca. Yeah, if there's any more comments about sessions or topics you'd like to see, or any feedback for Liam and myself, do let us know. But we will absolutely share the Menti slides and the PowerPoint presentation, and we really hope it's been valuable in considering some of these initiatives or processes in your work. So thank you all so much for joining us. We feel really privileged to be amongst such fantastic colleagues in the sector, and whether you're super busy this bank holiday weekend or having a lovely 4-day weekend off, we wish you a fantastic one. Have you got anything to add, Liam?
No, thank you so much, everyone. It was it was a pleasure to co-create this presentation with you, and yeah, do keep in touch.